So I've just pressed record to the cloud. So from now on, it's we're live in that sense. So what we're doing today is we're going to paint this beautiful full moon in a landscape. I've tried to paint the full moon in real time. I've gone out into the fields and painted it. But often I end up waiting for hours and hours and I don't see it. And then as soon as I arrive home, I see it in the sky. So it's something that's quite elusive. But I'm kind of obsessed in trying to paint it. I paint a lot of sunsets and skyscapes and sunrises. And the full moon is another kind of version of it, but it's very different. The moonlight doesn't tend to radiate out as much as a sun does, so it always sits like this beautiful disc in the sky. So we're going to try and create this morning, and it's bringing elements of what we learned on Saturday into it. And in Saturday we were looking at creating a tonal landscape, i.e. from dark to light and from light to dark. And we're going to be using our limited palette of colours again. So that is blue, red and yellow. Those primary colours make our secondary colours, which are orange, violet and green. We've also got the addition of white as well. So I'm just going to put my colours out on the palette. I'm putting blue closest to us, because as we look at the painting, there seems to be much more blue in there than anything else. I'm going to put red in the middle and then yellow right at the end. The reason I do that is that I don't really want much of my yellow creeping into the blues because it will turn it green. So I'm just putting the yellow there, and I will put a nice dollop of white there. So during these sessions, what we do, we tend to work in layers and we tend to try and build up our painting step by step. And we work on a little bit and then we move to the next bit, and then we let these areas settle and slowly sort of bring the picture alive through these layers. We'll now we'll paint for about 45 minutes or so, then have a little break. And then, as KC asked there, yes, we do we stop at about 20 to 11:45, and then we have a chat about how it's gone and any questions. But if you've got any questions along the way, do feel free to ask. We do have a little break around about 11 o'clock, and there's an opportunity there to just have a breather, change our water if needs be, and also ask some questions. So the brushes I'm using today, I've got this here, which is a round brush. It's synthetic, and I use this for most things. Oil, acrylic, watercolour, gouache. And I've got a smaller one there. Not sure if I'll need it, but I've just got it there just to as backup. Now there's a slight delay as I can see on my screen, and that's probably because it's recording, but don't worry about that. We shouldn't lose anything. So when I look at starting a painting like this, rather than drawing what I see, the outlines of things, I want to create an impression of the scene. So I want to make it loose and really based on blocks of colour and blocks of tone, rather than an accurate drawing of it. So in this painting here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to see each section as a block. So we've got this section here at the bottom. Okay, see, so you've got a flat brush. It doesn't matter too much. this is, if I put it against my finger here, you can kind of see the size. This is a round number 8, but equally you could use a flat brush around about the same size. I'm using this size brush because of the size of the page. If I was working on a bigger page, I'd take a bigger brush, and a smaller page, a smaller brush. So depending on the size of the paper you're using, this here is 8 by 10 inches, this paper. So I'm using a number 8 round brush, but I would say any kind of medium sized brush, whether it's round or flat. So it's medium in the sense that it goes probably all the way up to 15 size and all the way down to 0 size. So it's somewhere in the middle. So looking at my photograph, and again, I don't want to copy the photograph perfectly. I can see that each area is sort of loosely divided into these blocks. What I'm going to start with, and it's very different to what I started with on Saturday when we done a tonal workshop, is I'm going to start with what's known as the mid-tone. So a tone that's kind of in the middle on the photograph, and that is the mountains that are there, just here. And to create that kind of very muted blue colour, what I'm going to do, I'm going to work very fluid and light to start with. I'm going to take some blue. You see I've got a nice bit of water on the blue there. And into my blue, I'm going to add just a touch of red. Now, when I mix with these colours, I'll often just put that touch of red on the side there because I don't want to dip it straight in because it may be too powerful. So I'm just mixing that in there. I could do with a touch more red. So again, I'm just putting it on the side and slowly mixing that in. It's creating a kind of a violet colour, but it's not the colour that's actually those mountains actually are. Now, to make that colour, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a touch of yellow as well. And again, I'm putting it on the side and mixing that yellow into this here. Now, for me, it's gone too dark too quickly. So I'm going to take some blue and just add some blue in there. It's getting much closer to what I want now. A lot of colour mixing is just constantly adjusting and just trying to find that right colour. So I have here this kind of bluey grey. I'm going to add a tiny amount of white to it. This probably won't be the final colour of those mountains, but we just want to put something down. A little bit more blue in there. Okay, now with a relatively fluid brush, I'm going to try and just sketch out the top of that mountain line. Just bring it across here. You can see how fluid my paint is. And then with side-to-side motions, just begin to kind of fill in this space here. Touch more water. That's a good start. So we've got something down, and really this is the beginning part of our painting. What I'm going to do, because with gouache paint, I can leave that there and it can go dry, and I can make it alive again by adding water. But there's a few people working with acrylic today, so I'm going to paint as though I were using acrylic. So I'm just wiping this colour away now. So I'll just explain the difference between acrylic and gouache. Is that acrylic, once it dries permanently. It's a type of plastic, whereas gouache paint is much more like watercolour. Even 200 years after it's dried, you can take a wet brush and bring it to life again, whereas acrylic, once it's dry, it's dry. So our next step is to look up at our sky, and we can see that it's definitely lighter than the mountain area that we've just put in. What I'm going to do here is take some blue, and again I want it quite fluid for these initial layers. So I've taken some of my ultramarine blue here. It doesn't matter what blue you have. And to me, the sky looks like it's got a slight, very slight green tinge to it. So to make that, be very, very careful, because I don't want to make a green, I just want to have a slight tinge. I picked up a small amount of yellow there, and I'm just going to take a little bit of that and just mix it very lightly into my blue. Now we can see that the blue on my palette is much darker than that sky. So to tone that down, we add some white to it. Again, we won't get the colours perfect because we're limited by the pigments we have in the paints. And photography is much, much different to painting. Okay, so I've got a nice pale blue here. We're not going to worry about where our moon is going to be, because that will be one of the last things that we actually put in. So I just want to really cover my sky as best as possible. So I've made this mix nice and watery. I'm just going to start in the top and really just get this colour down. Whether you're using a round brush or a flat brush, it doesn't really matter about the technique here. You're just kind of almost scrubbing that wet colour into the sky. You can do it across like this, but I tend to like these motions because it creates a little bit more of an interesting surface, and you don't tend to get the streaks as much. I'm not bringing it all the way down to my mountains just yet. Just above. And now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take a little bit more and slightly more carefully bring it as close to and just over the mountains as possible. I'm trying to get rid of all of the white around here, because at the moment the white is the brightest thing on our page, and that can really confuse us when we're trying to add tones and colours. So again, it's just getting these basic shapes in first. There we go. So there's our second bit of colour. I'm just going to wipe this away again. Now, for the next element of the painting, one would think we would go down to these darker tree areas first, but I'm actually going to put the lighter colour in at the bottom. There's some, I can't see what flowers they are, but there's flowers in there. At this stage, we're not going to concern ourselves with that because it's too much detail. We want to just get that block coming across there. And to do that, we need to mix ourselves sort of a dark and lightish green. So what I'm going to do to make that green is take some yellow and add a bit of blue. The reason I do it in this order is because blue is the stronger of these two colours. If I were to add the yellow into the blue, I'd probably have to use all of that yellow there just to make that blue seem slightly green. Whereas if I take a nice bit of yellow and then just put a small amount of blue in there, you can see you get to a green very, very quickly. So I want this green to be as light as that, but also by adding another bit of blue here, as deep and dark as that too. So we're going to lay this in again in a very fluid way. So add some more water to it. And just across, I'm just going to brush this colour all the way over. I think I need a little bit more blue in there. It's a little bit too light for me. So I've added some blue to that mix. And I'm using these sort of two different tones of green with each other. So you see some of the lighter elements coming through, and then some of the darker elements also sort of flattening it down and laying on top of it. A little bit more water. Again, I'm just dragging this all the way across here. And then adding a few of those darker blue elements to it too. So you see that the basic shapes that are in our painting are starting to come together. The next step will be to put in our darkest colour here. We're going to work again in blocks and not worry about detail. We can add a bit of detail a little bit later on, but first we're just going to get the basic shapes in. So to do that, I want to make the darkest colour possible. Again, I'm going to wipe away my green. And to make this dark colour, there are a few ways to do it, but basically it's a combination of all of these colours together. Depends on what kind of mix, which is the dominant colour. If I were to use lots of yellow and less blue and less red, it's not going to get what I want. So I have to look at really what's my darkest colour out of these three and use that as the dominant colour in the mix. And the darkest colour is blue. It's funny, sometimes blue on the surface can look close to black. It's only when you kind of thin it out or add white that it becomes a brighter blue. So I'm going to take some blue. I've taken quite a big chunk of blue here. And remember when I said about mixing the green before, to make a green quickly, I wanted to add touches of blue to yellow. Now, the long way to make a green is to add little bits of yellow to blue. But what it does when you add it in this way is it starts creating a very, very, very dark green. It almost like an aqua green. So I've made this dark colour here, closer to indigo than everything else. I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to it. There, it's becoming like a real deep dark green now. And this is where we bring in our red. So to make the dark colours, it's a combination of all three of these. But we're also relying on something called complementary colours. Green and red are what's known as complementary colours. So when they sit next to each other, they actually enhance the other. Other examples of this are blue and orange or yellow and violet. So you'll see a lot of artists, designers, people using these combinations. You see it a lot in nature. Flowers, purple and yellow is very common. Something interesting happens though when you add a small amount of a complementary colour into another. So if green and red make each other stand out when placed together, when you add a tiny amount of red into a mix of green, instead of making it stand out, it actually cancels each other out. So our red going into the green is actually starting to make a black. It's very interesting what it does. And that means that using three colours, you can actually make any colour you want. People will often buy a tube of black paint, but as you can see here, I've made a black very, very easy. So I want to just add a touch more yellow to this, just to warm it up slightly and make it a bit more natural. And what I'm going to do, make it wet again, and just in this area here, and just see what I'm doing with my brush. I'm kind of just dabbing it over the surface. I'm not spreading this colour over, I'm just sort of dabbing it over. This is a fusion of techniques from watercolour and from acrylic and gouache too. I'm just kind of dabbing this colour over this area. Yeah, trying to get rid of the white. Bring a little bit up into that mountain. And along this bottom here where it's touching the lighter green. Okay, don't worry about any details, or if you think you've got the composition wrong or anything, it doesn't matter. Key is just trying to get rid of this white of the paper and get the basics of our shapes in there. Right, so here I'm just going to knock this little bit of white out my page. So here you can see the basics, and when we do this, it helps us see what we need to do next, what needs attention, what can be left, and where we can go from here. So for me, the next step with this is to really start flattening some of our colours down and our tones. I want to make it seem much more flat, in the sense of it not being streaky colours in my paint. So I'm just going to clear away this green paint here. Give my brush a good clean. For me, the next step, the best way to do it, is to actually start up in the sky again, and to really think about getting the sky as flat as possible in tone. We can put the mountain on next, after the sky, but the sky will really help determine what is going on with the rest of the painting. So to do that, I'm going to take some blue, and into my blue I'm going to add a bit of white. This time I want my colour to be more opaque when we put the initial layers in, and this is the difference between working with watercolour and in a watercolour way. The difference between that and gouache or acrylic is, in watercolour it's very difficult to get opaque colours. You rely much more on the transparency and the white of the paper to shine through. But we have this luxury with gouache and acrylic where we're able to add bits of white just to really help block out the white of the paper. You'll see in a minute when I actually apply it. So I've created this mix here. It's much less fluid than before. I'm realising I'm going to have to make some more. So I'm just adding blue, and into the blue some white. Just get it the right kind of tone the first time around, so I don't have to mix it again. So for me that's a little bit too light. So again, add some more blue into it. Before we said that the sky just had a slight kind of greenish tinge to it. I'm going to be very careful and just add a tiny, tiny amount of yellow. Right. So you can see how thick this paint is. It's lays down like this when you put it on. So it's much, much flatter and less wet. What I would do is start up in the top left corner, and I'm just, with these brush strokes, you can do this with a flat or a round brush, is I'm just kind of doing these relatively short brush strokes. It doesn't matter if you're not covering the whole of the colour beneath. We want little bits of it to come through. I'm noticing that it's probably a little bit too light, this colour. But it doesn't matter. We'll put it on and then we can adjust it afterwards. I'm just covering the sky. If you find you're running out of the mix, as I seem to be doing, just dip your brush, the tip of it, in the water and just add a little bit more water to it, not too much, but it kind of helps it flow a little better. It makes it look lighter when it goes on, but once the water's out of it, it will dry the same colour. So this is where you could kind of do with a bigger brush, cover that area very quickly. Okay. Now we've put our second layer of the sky on now, and it'll probably need, I think, at least one more layer on top. What we want to do now, I'm just going to check the time. We will have a break in about 10 minutes. But whilst we're here, what we're going to do now is go back to our mountains. Everything is relative in this painting. So at the moment, the sky doesn't look totally right. But then again, we haven't done our mountains or the second layer on our mountains yet. So to make other things balance out, we need to work on different areas. So again, I'm just going to wipe this away. Give my brush a little clean. So here's where we try to make our mountains slightly more opaque and flat too. And to do that, we're going to add more white to our mix and use the paint in a slightly thicker way. So I've just put a bit more blue onto my palette. And I'm going to take some of this blue and just mix it up, not adding too much water this time. You often need just a bit to make your paint movable. Okay. And into my blue. Okay, I'm looking at the colour of those mountains, very interesting. I'm going to add a tiny amount of red. Yeah, I've just put my red on the side. A little bit more. And then into that, just also a touch of yellow. The mountains too have got that slight kind of greeny haze to it. So I'm mixing that in there. A little bit more blue. And now we'll add a touch of white. The white automatically makes it much flatter and more opaque. I think I may need a bit more white in there. I always find it's better to put something down lighter than it is darker. So even if it's too light, it's better than too dark, because if it's too light, you can put dark on top. But if it's too dark, it's harder to bring that around. So I've got this nice kind of grey blue colour here. Just going to dip my brush again and get it slightly fluid, but not as much as we did in the first layer. And again, I'm going to feel out the shape of those mountains. And I'm using the tip of my brush to do that. And I'm going to bring it over the sky slightly too. Right, so let's put the kind of a line in there. Make this slightly higher. And now I'm going to sort of fill in this bottom. But with this, I don't really want to create one flat uniform colour. I want some of those tones from a previous layer to come through. So to do that, I've got paint on my brush, and I'm just kind of letting my brush kind of sort of dance over the surface a bit. So some of that undercolour is still coming through. I'm going to bring it over my tree line slightly at the bottom. Going to knock out any bits of white. And just drag this right over. You can see the kind of motions I'm using. It's much more like scrubbing now. And kind of, they call this scrubbing, but it's also something known as scumbling, where you take a small amount of paint and rub it over or scrub it over previous layers, leaving gaps of that previous layer shining through. So there we've got that basic silhouette of the mountains in. I don't want to create too much of a smooth edge with the mountain. I want it to be a little bit broken. So I'm just running my brush over the top there. I'm going to come out of the big screen a moment because we're going to have a little break. And what we'll do, we'll have about 6-7 minute break, and give us a chance to change our water and have a little breather. Then we'll come back. What time is it now? So if we come back at 10:55, and then you can ask any questions, and then we'll go on to the next stages. All right. So have a nice break, everyone.
Richard. Richard.
Hello, yes. Hi,
Can I ask you, you know the stroke of the brush?
Yes.
Do you show me how you use
Yes,
it?
absolutely. Just give me 1 second.
What is
Okay, so you want to see the brush strokes that I'm doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me just grab a piece of paper, a spare piece of paper. Just going to put a bit of paper over here and show you on here. I'll make the screen bigger again.
Okay.
There seems to be a delay in it, but I think that's because it's recording. But let me make it bigger. Oh,
It is big.
yeah, it's big now. Let me try again. There we go. Yeah. So I'm using different brush strokes, but in the mountains that I just done, what I'm doing is I'm taking my brush, and my paint is relatively fluid, but not as much as those previous layers, those watercolors, and I'm kind of covering the sides of my brush, and you can do this with a flat brush too, and then I'm kind of just like, can you see that I'm sort of scrubbing it over the surface, not very hard, but quite lightly, like this. I'm going to add some more white to that because it's thinned out a little bit too much, really. So I'm taking my brush and I'm just kind of scrubbing it over the surface like that. You can see how my hand is kind of just like moving from side to side as I'm doing it. On the sky, what I was doing much more like that. Yeah. But with this one, it's much more kind of short movements and letting the dryness of the paint just sort of drag over the surface like so. And in doing that, you get a little bit more control over your brushwork, but it also creates these sort of textures as well. Now, we were doing it over another color, and I'll show you how it looks over this blue here. So I need to make it a bit darker. Taking some more blue.
And I could do that with the acrylic paint, or I can't.
Yes, you can do that with acrylic, yeah.
Because it dries, as you say, it dries very quickly.
It dries really quickly, yeah. So the key is to sort of dip back into your pile of paint and have a little bit of water on there.
Yeah, I should go and get some good juice,
gouache. Yeah, gouache. Yeah, they're really fascinating paint to work with because they do, you know, you can liven them up again with.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, there's advantage of it. Yes, I will get some of that. Yes.
Yeah. So I'll just show you with this slightly darker color over here. So very sort of short, scrubby kind of brush movements, and you can see then some of that undercolor is coming through.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure. So I will just clean this blue off my palette here. Has anybody else got any questions? If not, we will carry on and go to the next step. Now, if you're using acrylic, as Casey is, things dry very quickly. Oh, hi, Maria. Unmute yourself and you can ask a question.
Oh, I remember Casey from the walking.
Yes,
I thought I recognized you.
Yes, I thought I recognized you too.
Yeah, you look.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Was it? What's her name? Told you about it.
Janet.
Janet told her. Yeah, yeah.
So Janet couldn't make it today, but she'll hopefully be at the next
comes
one.
along.
Yeah. Right. So okay. So I will start back up. Here we go. Right. So I've just moved this paint off here. And again, if you're using acrylics, you might want to sort of put some more onto your palette now. I'm going to put some more gouache because acrylics do dry very quickly. Gouache dries very quickly, but we have that sort of extra special thing in it that you can quickly bring them back to life. So we're going to look now at the next stage. For me, I'm going to look down at this bottom area. It's much too bright at the moment. So we really want to sort of get some darker tones in there. We still want bits of this bright green to come through because that's in the photograph. So to do that, to make that darker green, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take some yellow. And again, if you really want it in the green realm, start with yellow first and add blue to it. If you want to make it closer to a kind of an indigo type colour, start with blue and add bits of yellow. So I've taken some yellow here and I'm going to add a bit of blue. Now that is probably too light again. So I'm going to add a bit more blue to it. So it's very deep and dark now. This area I'm going to treat a little bit different to these areas, is I'm going to not make things so opaque. I'm going to really want some of those golden tones to shine through. We're treating it in a much more watercolor way. So I've got my dark green here. I'm just going to get a bit of water on it. Start at the bottom here, and I'm just going to drag this over. Try and knock out as much of that bright colour as possible. You see, I'm doing similar brush strokes that I've done up on the mountain. I'm just kind of half dabbing, half scrubbing, and just very short kind of, see my hand doing it, I'm kind of doing like that. With short sort of side to side movements. Now, I'm not going to dip my brush back into the paint, even though there's not much paint left on there, because I want it to, as it goes up, to slowly have more of the yellow shining through. And here I'm going to be much more careful about how much pressure I'm putting on there. I really want a lot of that greeny yellow colour underneath to be shining through. And just dragging the tip over, again, very short side to side motions. And it's bringing, by doing this, it's really bringing the field area of the photo, of the painting, in line with a lot of these tones that we've got in the background, much more dark and muted. Okay, just trying to knock out any brightness. I'm actually going to bring it all the way up to the trees that are up here too. And I'm doing, again, those similar side to side, but now I'm just sort of almost doing, if you imagine doing figure of 8 kind of movements, in sort of starting to do a figure of 8 and then stopping and kind of going back. So it's scrubbing in more circular motions now. There we go. And you see how that's just brought that tone of that area right down and in line with the rest of the painting. I still feel it needs to be darker at the bottom. So I'll wipe away my colour here and start again. So I'm going to take some yellow. Nice bit of yellow there. And into it add some blue. Get this real dark, nice earthy green going on. A little bit more blue. Now to this, you remember me saying that with a limited palette, we have to rely on complementary colours to create some of the darks. So green and red together are complementary colours. When they sit next to each other, they make the other one sing in their brightness. But when we add a small amount of that complementary into a mix with the other, what it does, it actually cancels out the intensity of each and brings the tone right down. So I'm adding some red into my green. Yeah, it's made this really almost browny olive green. Could add just a touch more blue into it, just to keep it nice and dark. I've got this colour here, which, like I say, is like a much more of an olivey green than anything. Now with a relatively dry brush, I'm covering each side of the brush. I'm going to start again at the bottom of my page and just kind of drag that colour over in those side to side motions. Leaving a lot of those undertones coming through still. And then I'm going to come along again on that top row, not dipping my brush in any more paint. Being slightly lighter in how I'm dragging it across, side to side. You see, each time we add those dark tones, the landscape seems to come together much more. They seem to work in more harmony. I still want a bit more dark at the bottom here, so I'm just going to add a bit more blue to that mix. And then just in a few areas, just dabbing over the surface, just to create a slightly darker tone right at the bottom. Okay. just going to get rid of this green. So I can see already by adding these darker tones here, what needs attention and what is too light in a painting. And for me, it's the sky. As soon as we darken everything else down, the sky jumps out to me as something that is a little bit too light. So we're going to have to put that third layer on the sky to bring it closer to the tones that we see in a mountain, tree and field. And thankfully to do that, it's relatively straightforward. So put some more blue out. We obviously don't want it as dark as the mountain here, but if you compare in the photograph the colour of the mountains in the photograph and the sky to what's in the painting, you can see the sky is much too light. So I'm going to take a large amount of blue this time. I made a mistake before of not taking enough. And have a bit of water in there to make it fluid. Now into that I'm going to add a small amount of white. Really we want to sort of start adding the white in smaller portions. This is making a very nice deep blue, but when I check it against my mountains, it's darker than the mountains. So we need to add more white again. A little bit more. I'm just going to check against my mountains. Yeah, it's still almost as dark. So added quite a bit more white to it now. But now I've made it a little bit too close to the previous sky. This is what we get when we paint. Either have it too light or too dark. Let's just try and get that middle balance. So adding some more blue to this now. I think we're getting closer to it. And as before, just a tiny touch of yellow. Right, so I'm going to dip my brush in the water and get this paint nice and workable. And start there closer to my mountains without letting it touch the top of the mountain straight away. And just start putting this colour in. So here you see I'm doing sort of side to side, quite short strokes, but enough to cover it. Again, I'm leaving a bit of the colour from the previous layer shining through. Adding a bit more water to make this paint go further. And now I'm just going to take it up to the mountain line. So that's really closer to the sky colour. Again, not perfect because of the pigments we're using. Never get it perfect, but it helps to work in these different tones because you can really kind of bring other areas into one another by matching the tones and getting that overall kind of tonal value going on. It's like a tonal harmony, I should say. Again, I'm just clearing away that blue. Now the image I'm looking at, I'm not seeing that many details because I'm sort of sat up here and the image I can see is this little screen over here. So there's a lot I'm missing. I'm kind of just seeing the basics of the shapes. And in many ways that's good because we don't get too caught up in the detail of things. We can just focus on those basics. I'm writing something at the moment for my website about, you know, how I paint and how I think about paintings. And I'm writing something about, for me, some of the best landscapes I've seen is where I just see a glimpse of it out of the corner of my eye if I'm on a train or driving somewhere, because you lose all of the details and you just see like the essence of it. And I think if you can get the essence of a painting down, then when you start to add a few details on top, it feels much more harmonious because you've got that core essence down. So our next step is to again come back to our trees. And I mentioned that me not being able to see details for a reason here, because I can't see much because I can't see much of the photograph. But what we're going to do, we're going to go back to our darker tone and just add some interesting aspects for where the trees would be. I'm going to use a slightly smaller brush this time. It doesn't matter if you don't have one. You could use the tip of the brush I had, but I'm going to use this as well because it's completely dry at the moment. And I want my brush to be completely dry for the next stage. So I'm going to put out some more blue, and I want to create the darkest tone possible again. And as we've done before, it's a combination of all three of our primary colours, but the key aspect is in which is the dominant colour. So blue is the darkest colour in these trees. It's the darkest colour on our palette. So blue will have to be the dominant colour in our mix here. So I'm going to take some blue. I've got quite a nice amount of it there. And I want to create a slightly greeny blue. So I'm adding a bit of yellow to that. And as you can see, it has very little effect on the blue. It doesn't turn it to green very quickly. It turns it into this amazing, looks like Prussian blue or indigo. Going to add a little bit more yellow to that, and you can notice I'm not adding any water at all at this point. This is a very, very dark colour. Now, I will have to add just a touch of water because it dries so quickly. I need it to be slightly workable. So I've got this very, very dark green here, and into it I'm adding a microscopic amount of red. I often see this red on my palette here, very much like chili in a meal. It's so strong, this red, that I add about the same amount as I would add chili to a meal, because it can quickly overpower it. So I've added some red to that. Now I've got a very, very dry brush. I want to just create some impressions of trees coming over my area here. I've got the side of my brush, and my brush is loaded with colour, and it's very dry colour. I'm just going to drag my brush over the surface. Can you see what it's doing there? I'm just dragging it over the surface. It's just creating sort of almost like the tops of where trees would be. Now the main tree that I can see is this large one here. And again, not worrying about the details of the trees. I just want to create this kind of idea of something coming up along here. So I'm just dragging my brush very carefully. The paint is not fluid at all. Just dragging it over the surface. It's quite a tricky technique, but you can go back and watch it, and if you're finding it tricky now, you can go back and watch and have another go. So I'm just looking where the tops of these trees are. And we're actually going to bring some of this colour down into this area as well. So these don't just look like they're separate from it. So this mix is drying very quickly. Again, just a dip of water just to bring it around a bit. And I'm going to also drag my brush over that dark green area that I put in earlier. So the paint is, best way I can describe it is it's sort of tacky. It's got a tacky quality to it. So we've got some sort of basic shapes there. If I had more time, I would spend a bit more time shaping those and trying to create much more ideas of trees. You can sort of do it with little lines as well to suggest branches, but we're a bit short on time. So people can watch the video afterwards and just experiment, but I'll just give you an example of how I maybe do a branch up and I'm improvising here and put my one in. So you see, just with a little very fine brush stroke here and there, and just drag the brush over like that. And also you can create some slight lighter tones going on in that area as well if you want. But really we're doing that impression of what we see, getting those basics in, and from the basics you can build. We are going to actually, in our field here, you can see little elements of yellow. We're going to use a very same similar technique as we've done with the trees there. It's quite quick to do. Just picking up some yellow, getting it on my brush. Now, I don't want this yellow to be too bright, so I'm going to have to tone it down with a little bit of white. There's still some green left in my brush there, but it doesn't matter. So I've got some of this yellow on the brush. Just very carefully, just over my surface. And again, you can pay a bit more attention to this in time, but just dragging my brush over there, just to bring a little bit of that yellow into our scene. It's almost like it's being lit up slightly by the moonlight. Just dragging it over the page. And I'll leave that for now, just because of time, and we don't have the most important part of the painting, or the cherry on top, as they say, which is the moon. So I'll clear away all my stuff here. Just going to have to grab some more paper towel. I'll be back in a second. So I'm going to clean away these colours the best I can. When we do our moon, we really want the colours to not be contaminated by the others, because it's a lovely yellowy, slightly orange colour. I'm also going to put some more yellow out, because my yellow here has got little bits of blue in it, just turned it green. I really want a pile of yellow that is just going to be for my moon. And I'm going to wash this brush out as best I can, so there's none of the other colours coming through when I do that mix. It's here where I'd probably clean my water, but I'm in my studio and I don't have a tap in here, so I'd have to go all the way to the house. Right, so my brush is probably as clean as I can get it. And now we're going to look at our moon. Our sky up here is nice and dry now, so we can paint over the top of it with relative ease. And when we look at our moon, it's very difficult to get a perfect circle in the sky. And I don't want us to worry about that too much. It's something you can kind of work on in your own time if you want to get it right. But when I create a moon or a sun, I never normally go for a perfect circle because it often looks out of place. What I'm going to do to mix the colour is take a nice amount of white. Yeah, nice and thick. So my brush is dry. I'm seeing here actually that some of those older colours are coming through. So I'll just wipe the brush again. I'll actually put some more white down. So I've got some nice thick white paint there. Now into that, I'm going to add some yellow. It creates this lovely pale yellow. I want it a little lighter still. Really work that white and yellow together. Now, looking at the moon, it's got that slight kind of orange tinge to it, and I'm not talking about the seas or whatever it is on the moon. Talking about the general colour of it. So I'm just going to take a touch of red, and again, this red is like chili, so I take it very easy with it and just mix that in there. Make it slightly pinker. Okay. Now on my test bit of paper, where I've got some blue already, just going to mark that down and see if that's relatively close to the general moon colour. I think I need a bit more red in there. Yeah, that's good enough for me. So with this, I've got my brush. I'm really coating it in this paint. I've kept the paint moving to keep it fluid. And I'm going to work out where my moon is in the sky. So it's off center. It's about there. And I tend to start with a little horizontal line like that, just one brush stroke. And then just above it, do another, slightly shorter. And then below it, do another again. Again, it's not a perfect circle, but when I now take my brush around the edge, I can start to just create a bit more of a circle shape. Right, so I'm kind of happy with that for the moment. What I want to do is let that dry as much as it can, because we'll do another layer over the top of it. But it's sitting nicely in the sky there. And you can see how just by having that that kind of source of light in it, it makes our other areas seem either darker or lighter. To me, I think my green at the bottom, again, is still a little bit too light. And the trees, and maybe or this tree line or block of trees, it's maybe a little bit too small. I've made the land a little bit too big. I'm just going to quickly try and darken down this area whilst I wait for the moon to dry. So I'm going to, and again, this is something you can do afterwards if you want. I'm kind of doing this now at twice the speed because of time constraints. So I'm going to take some yellow and I'm going to do it over here so I don't contaminate my moon colour. I've got some yellow here and I'm going to add a healthy amount of blue into it. And a tiny touch of red. The red is cancelling out the intensity of the green and making it much earthier and darker. A little bit more blue in there. So with the dry brush, the brush is slightly damp. I'm just going to take some of the excess water off. On this area where my field is, doing those side to side kind of scrubby strokes again. Actually going to go over some of that yellow that I put in. I really want to bring the tone down a lot. Still leaving some of the colours from beneath shining through. Just dragging over here. Actually going to bring it up to the tree line a bit more. So that's shifted it for me into a much more natural kind of feel. Again, I would probably go and add some yellow elements afterwards, but I'd want to bring my trees down a bit more as well. But because of time, we'll move on. Got about another 6 minutes, 7 minutes of painting left. So my moon should be drying. I just want to add a little bit of orangey colour to it. So to do that, we're going to start by making an orange, to make an orange. And it's surprising we haven't actually made an orange at all in this painting. Yeah. So I've taken some yellow, and again with this red, just a touch of it. It doesn't matter what blue, red, yellow you've got, those principles are always the same, that red and yellow will make an orange, blue and yellow will make a green, and blue and red will make a violet. The types of violets and oranges and greens are all slightly different, but the principle is the same. So if I add this red into this yellow here and create this orange colour. A little bit more red. Now I really want to tone that down because it's not that intense. So I'm going to put some white there. Add some white into that mix. Now with this slightly more orange colour, just over the top of my moon, not all of it. Needs a bit more pinky orange in it. Just dragging my brush over the top. And again, a little bit more. I should have left it to dry a bit because it's picking up the colour beneath. So I'm not going to push it just yet. Give it a bit more time. I'll run through, whilst that's drying, I'll run through what I would do next, where I think the painting's successful, where I don't, and how to build upon this. Most of the workshops I do tend to run into this problem where I don't have enough time to really resolve the picture. But hopefully what it does, it gives you that foundation for where to go next. If you get all of your tones and your composition right, it means then when you add those details in, you've got the foundations. So the painting is based on those solid foundations. So for me, looking at it, of course, my moon, I'd want to pay a bit more attention to make it a little bit more dominant in the sky. They're always very difficult to do, which is surprising, seeing as it's just a circle in the sky. I'm kind of happy with the blue that the sky became, but there were elements of the mountain that I'm not too happy with. I think it needs a little bit more tonal variety in there. So I would take this bluey grey colour and I'd actually make a slightly darker version of it, and just in areas just add some of those darker versions to the mountain range to make them feel more realistic. Talking about the sky, and I've noticed this too, that it gets lighter as it comes towards these mountains. So I'd probably work on making a gradation downwards, so darker becoming slightly lighter as it comes down. Equally in the mountains, I think leaving some of the gaps from the previous layers shining through helps create light areas, but I think it could do with some more. So in the mountains, I would probably make this colour again, but do a lighter version, a darker version, and then this middle version too. Another important part is that the trees there, I've just put in some basic shapes. They definitely need some attention and some more work, and just try to give them a bit of character, going with that dry brush and just dragging it over to create those silhouettes. Really, we need a darker colour still, but we can't make it with what we've got. I'd bring this down also, this tree line down, and spend a bit more time on the field to give it a little bit more light, but a little bit more shadow as well. So I don't think I'm going to have time to do the moon now, but what I would do is just let that dry more. And with my mix here, just put a little touch of it over the top. I wouldn't worry too much about getting the circle exactly right. It's an impression and not a direct copy. When we paint like this as well, and when I paint in these demonstrations and videos, really what I'm trying to help you do is to be able to sort of not be too precious about what you see in front of you. If you were to be painting this moon out in the mountains where this is, it would have already changed lots of times. It changes every minute pretty much. So you can't be too focused and precious about one scene. All right. So I will come out of the main view and come on here now. And what I'll actually do is I'll stop the recording now and we can have a chat.